Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is Cover 3 College Football Summer School. We've done our research on the teams, and now we're bringing on the top team experts from the 24/7 Sports Network to help us fill in the blanks. Please follow us on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast. That's Cover 3 Podcast. And leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. All right, class is in session. Pleased to welcome in Ben Moore, our Georgia State everything guy from PantherTalk. Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bud. Appreciate it.
Man, I feel like we've talked on Twitter forever, and this is the first time I've actually gone face to face. So I'm excited about this, and hopefully you can help me fill in some of the gaps that I have in my offseason prep about Georgia State. Pretty nice season you guys have been having 2 years in a row up there. 2 bowls in a row. Last year, pretty terrible start, 1-4, and then turned it on. QB switch, I believe I saw. Finished 8-5 overall. Power rated in the 70s, which, for a Sun Belt team, that's a pretty good, power rating score on a national basis. Were the fans pretty happy there, I assume?
Yeah, most definitely. I think Sean Elliott's got it cooking really. That was last year was year 5, and it's still crazy to think about. This is the program's only 12th season in existence. So you got some programs who've been here for 50, 60, 100 years potentially. These guys are basically middle schoolers in terms of where we're dealing with only a 13-year-old program moving in. But tough schedule to start out. Road games against North Carolina, the home opener against Army. It's always difficult to kind of game plan for that just because it throws off your preparation offensively and defensively. But then things kind of started getting rolling. Had a near miss there on the road against Auburn, and the offense really gets rolling with the running game. Just a double-headed monster there with Tucker Gregg and Jemias Williams. Those two guys are really tough, and really for the Sun Belt, kind of ascended in a way. 6-2, set the program record there, and 8th win there in the bowl game, just blowing the doors off Western Kentucky there. So expectations are very, very high again for 2022 with 18 starters back, and as we talked a little bit before, returning quarterback and all the offensive line and the running backs that I mentioned.
So last year I kept betting Georgia State overs. They played at a really high tempo. I kept losing them because they would get in the red zone and kind of screw around at times, and their defense would come up with some miracle stops at times as well. But I need to ask you a couple questions about the offense this year. Did they go through 2 offensive coordinators already this offseason?
Yeah, welcome to Sun Belt life in the mid-major, right? Your offensive coordinator gets plucked, and it goes to Virginia Tech to be the quarterback's coach up there. Then Sean Elliott promoted Josh Stepp, who quickly went to Louisville there. So, which was a little bit of fun there. Scott Satterfield is a former teammate of Sean Elliott at App State. So he called up his old buddy and said, I'm taking him with me, and he's going to be the tight ends coach. Now you're on OC number 3 in this calendar year here. So it has been a little bit of a difference, but Trent McKnight, who was the wide receiver coach, took over, just had the spring game last Friday night, and the offense isn't going to look too much different in terms of play calling or style. This is still going to be probably a 65% rushing attack. They want to pound the football, but I think in year 2 with Darren Granger as the quarterback, they definitely want to try to test things down the field and have a 6th-year tight end. He is actually older than his position coach and has caught a touchdown pass from his position coach. I'm not sure there's anybody else in America that can say that.
That's got to be some kind of record. So McKnight, has he been anywhere else? I'm not super familiar with him.
Yeah, so he came from the FCS ranks. He's been on the staff basically since year 1 with Sean Elliott. He was a guy from Samford, was a part of that program, and like the air raid and throw the ball all over the place there. But he's a guy that's been on the staff, familiar with the personnel. He's recruited every single one of the wide receivers, wants to get the ball out in space with them. Has done a really good job developing wide receivers. And at the Sun Belt level, you're going to find guys that are not highly ranked all the time, but you're going to have to go find those individuals and then train them up. You're not going to have the 6'3", 6'4", 6'5" guys. You're going to have to look for those 5'11", 5'10" guys with some speed, and then really kind of develop them out. And he's done a really good job of building the roster there, and probably one of the deeper rooms in the Sun Belt.
Tendency-wise, we're still expecting a lot of tempo, or about the same level of tempo?
I would expect that certainly with more familiar. You've got 4 offensive linemen back, your entire wide receiving group back. Starting tight end back. Guys that are really understanding the terminology. It's not going to change from what Sean Elliott's talked about this spring so far. Would expect some movement and really want to get those play count numbers up.
Nice. Last one on the offense here. Last year, my numbers say Georgia State chucked it deep a lot, but they really didn't connect on a lot of those deep passes. I know they got some pass interference, which doesn't really, account for that. But are you expecting better deep balls this year as far as connection? And if so, why?
Yeah, the biggest thing I think is Darren Granger continuing to get more comfortable. He was kind of a victim of the COVID season. He came from Furman, so as a true freshman, started 4 games for the Paladins down there. Then 2020, of course, gets leveled in the FCS ranks. So only I think a handful of programs actually played. Furman did not. So he transferred 2021. Basically was the starter from game 3 on from there, and was 8-3 as a starter. Really impressive there. He's a guy that has a big arm, and that's the biggest, kind of working point this offseason is really trying to harness that and really trying to connect with his wide receivers. But he's got some guys that can really move. Jamari Thrash was their leading receiver in 2021, a guy that can really get out in open space. Robert Lewis is another guy that they're really high on. Josias Credle is another guy who was a transfer from the University of Central Florida, kind of got his feet wet last year as a sophomore, didn't play much at UCF as a freshman, but he's a big 6'2.5", 6'3" target on the outside as well. They really want to attack the seams as well as get things out on the outside. So I do expect a step forward for the Panthers this fall.
Awesome. So that's all I got on the offense. Real quickly on the defense, pretty strong defense last year by Sun Belt standards, one of the better ones in the conference. Are you thinking about the same, better, worse? And then specifically, it looked like they had a little struggles at times on 3rd and longs. What do you see for the defense this year?
Yeah, it's a 3-4 attacking defense for Nate Fuqua. This is year 6 for him, so he's been here since day 1 with Sean Elliott. Had some of his position coaches move around and get promoted and end up in Power 5 situations, which happens, of course, in the Sun Belt. But very opportunistic defense. They've been usually top 10, top 15 in the country the last few years and forcing turnovers. They also get in the backfield a ton. They set school records back-to-back seasons in sacks. They have one of the better safeties in the country in Tavius Lane. They call him the hit stick. If you remember Tyrann Mathieu, he's kind of the Sun Belt version of the Honey Badger, if you will. He's about 5'9", about $180, and flies around, gets his head in right on the football wherever he is, and has actually already the program leader in interceptions, and took one back for 6 against Western Kentucky in the bowl game. But no, I think up front, a guy like Thomas Gore, if you focus on some of the Pro Football Focus or different numbers, they actually have rated him as the highest rated interior lineman in the nation. And that's not just mid-major Sun Belt, group of 5, Power 5. He was number 1. He takes over full time at the nose guard position. Outside, you got a guy by the name of Jamil Muhammad, who was a quarterback recruit for Vanderbilt, is playing outside linebacker. And overall, every staff member that I talked to this spring is just so excited about Jamil because he's probably a high 4.5 guy at that outside linebacker, 6'3", about 235. Not the typical type of athlete that you're going to see in the Sun Belt, and he's going to be a problem attacking folks, basically coming off the edge. And kind of in that mold of what Jordan Strawn was when he was 2 years ago when he led the nation in sacks and is now, of course, with South Carolina.
All right, Ben, anything else our listeners need to know about Georgia State? You think they're a legitimate threat to win the conference this year? Any player that we haven't mentioned or you think will make a huge impact for them or could really change their power rating from a betting standpoint, or maybe any spot where they're still looking to take a transfer?
Yeah, they're still looking for a kicker at this point, which we know kickers are people too. They every college team, either you have one or you don't. We see that every single fall. Most certainly, they're looking at the transfer portal currently there. Still looking to improve. I think some in the secondary potentially, but I'm very interested in how September lines up for the Panthers. They host. They first travel to South Carolina. The vast majority of this coaching staff is from the state of South Carolina. Of course, Sean Elliott was the interim when Steve Spurrier left University of South Carolina midterm, and then kind of even a backstory. So I mentioned Jordan Strawn a little bit earlier. He was, if you will, encouraged to jump into the transfer portal by certain folks that were associated with the South Carolina program. So that's going to have all the juice there in the opener there. for the Panthers. And then GSU will come home and host the University of North Carolina for their first ever Power 5 game at home there at Center Park Stadium, downtown Atlanta. So it will be very intriguing to start out, of course, with 2 Power 5 programs. You still have a road trip to Army before the new Sun Belt schedule begins there in October. So a lot of excitement. Certainly the next step is winning the conference and competing for that championship, and really having an opportunity to go out and knock off like an App State in the division, or trying to ascend like Coastal Carolina did a few years ago.
Absolutely. All right, Ben, PantherTalk.com. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me, Bud. Appreciate it.
Hey, guys, welcome back into another edition of the Cover 3 Podcast Summer School Series, and we are here to talk a little East Carolina. And to do just that, we're going to be bringing on Stephen Igoe of our 24/7 Sports East Carolina site, Hoist the Colors, also the Hoist the Colors podcast. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Bud.
Man, I'm excited about this one. A team that I have a lot of questions about for 2022, and pretty interesting. Kind of a mid-70s power rated team last year. A solid squad, not a true AAC contender, but not one of the worst teams in the league either. Some of the wins, I'm a little bit feel like they're a little sketchy. CSU, Tulane, USF, Temple, Navy were kind of bottom of the barrel, but I feel like they also competed in some other games pretty well. What was kind of the general fan feel for what the season was last year? People pretty happy with it?
Yeah, I think most people were very happy with it, just because you have to remember, you look at East Carolina, and obviously a pretty good tradition, you would say, for a non-Power 5 school, but the last 6 years leading into last year had just been a disaster. I mean, the controversial firing of Ruffin McNeil following the 2015 season, the subsequent hire of Scotty Montgomery was met with some criticism at the time. He posted 3 consecutive 3-9 seasons. Really, the program, when Mike Houston took it over ahead of the 2019 campaign, was a relative disaster, and they were at the bottom of the barrel in the American and had a lot of ground to make up. And so it didn't happen overnight, and he didn't go the, hey, let's bring in a bunch of transfers, bring in a bunch of JUCO route. He really wanted to build it for the foreseeable future. So there were some painful days in those first 2 years. And then finally in year 3, you finally start to see them, put some distance between themselves and maybe the other part of the bottom of the league, South Florida, Temple. They began to pass those teams. They beat Tulane. And then all of a sudden they go on the road. They compete with UCF. They compete with Houston. Really, you can make an argument, could have won those games. Also could have beaten South Carolina at home early in the season. So from a competitive standpoint, made big growth. And it was a pretty young core. Much of that team is back. So I think a lot of people saw it as a major step in the right direction. Now, how can they build on that?
Well, one of the real things I'm interested to see this team, and we'll get to the unit that I'm most confident in. I assume you are as well, the defense second. But I want to start with the offense here, just because that's kind of how I wrote it on my sheet. Looking at their stat profile last year, and I watched some of their games, some of their highlights in doing this. It felt like the run game on an efficiency basis was poor, but they had some explosive runs that, if you were just looking at their average, kind of hid that. What do they have an ability this year to be a little more consistent with the run game, so that they're in more 2nd and 6 as opposed to 2nd and 8, you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that is the thing they want to get more consistent at, because they had Keaton Mitchell, who I think he's legitimately a 4.3 guy in the 40 and was timed as one of the fastest backs in the country last year, and really, probably one of the more explosive players in college football that a lot of people probably don't know about. So they need to get him more, just instead of hitting the big runs, to hit some more medium runs, because he can clearly hit the big ones. And they also had Rajay Harris, a kid from South Carolina, who had a big freshman year in 2020, kind of took a step back. He's more of the bigger back, 5'10", 215, 220. They really need to get him going in addition to Keaton Mitchell. And the biggest problem last year was just the offensive line was way too inconsistent. And they've addressed that in a big way. They've gone out. They've added 3 transfers, 2 of which will arrive this summer. Parker Moore from West Virginia, a former starter there, is already in. He went through spring practice. They returned 3 other starters. And a lot of those guys moved positions last year, and now they're kind of settled into a spot. And you add on top of that with the transfers. They're hoping that leads to some more continuity and consistency in the run game. I think the running back talent is certainly there. It's just a matter of whether they can be consistent up front and open those holes consistently.
For sure. On kind of on the flip side, while the run game was sort of inconsistent but explosive, I felt like the passing game was, more short passes, they're a little more efficient and consistent, but they lacked the explosive play compared to what they were able to hit in the run game. I got make me feel better about this receiver room if you feel better about it, or maybe you don't. But like Snead and now I'm going to butcher how we say his name, Omatosho, they're gone at receiver. See, is Johnson still suspended? What's his receiver room look like? I'm skeptical, I guess, here.
Yeah, that's
Should
the
I be?
one big concern with the offense is the receiver room because, like you mentioned, Omatosho, and you did get that right.
Okay.
Omatosho is gone. C.J. Johnson is still suspended indefinitely. We'll see what happens there. Tyler Snead is really the reason they went so underneath last year with the short stuff. He was so dynamic in the slot, at least so consistent. And so to lose him was a blow, and they really were not expecting him to go pro early. He ended up passing up his 2 years of eligibility to try and take a shot at the NFL. We'll see how that works out long term. But to me, that's the biggest question mark of the team, not only the offense, is how is this receiver position going to play out? One thing I have noticed during spring practice, you're going to see a lot more tight ends, 2 tight end sets. Ryan Jones had a big year, Oklahoma transfer, and I think he might end up being one of the focal points of the offense. Last year was only his first year playing offense. He had a pretty big season. Shane Calhoun's another young tight end they really like. But they're bringing in a transfer from Toledo, Isaiah Winstead. I saw him at the spring game. He's not here yet, but he was visiting. He's a legitimate 6'3", 215. He's a big boy, proven receiver. They think he can be a number one in this offense. Time will tell there. And I ultimately think they'll add another transfer as well. They also added Jalen Johnson, a transfer from Georgia, who was a former walk-on who ended up getting a scholarship there. He missed a good chunk of the spring with a hamstring. So that's really the one position where they're trying to shore up, and they don't want it to hold them back from maybe having the breakout season that they believe they can have.
They believe in Ehlers?
Yeah, I think so,
Okay.
for sure. I think they believe in Ehlers, and I think that, it's not the prettiest quarterback to watch in the world in terms of throwing motion and athleticism and all that, but they love his, he's just a gamer. Mentally, he gets the game as well as anybody. He's such a leader, can get the offense in and out of the right plays based on what the defense is doing. This is his basically 4.5 year as a starting quarterback if he ends up starting the whole season due to the extra year of COVID eligibility. So he's got the experience. They believe in him. Second half of last year is kind of the Holton Ahlers they envision. And what they need to do is they just struggled to begin these last few seasons under Mike Houston. They need to find a way to start the season strong, or at least offensively to have a good start to the season, which has been a struggle under this regime.
Excellent. All right, so switching over here to the defense real quick. Front seven should be pretty damn nice by AAC standards, right?
Yeah, it should be. I mean, they have basically everybody back, and they added a grad transfer and Chandre Mims from Charleston Southern, who was an All-American at the FCS level. So, I mean, they should be really good. They lose 2 part-time starting linebackers, but really the guys stepping in for them play just as much. And they have one guy who's a former all-conference guy, and Xavier Smith, an inside linebacker, who will now return to inside linebacker full-time after playing a couple of different spots last year. So I feel really good about the front seven. I think that, Elijah Morris is a third-year defensive lineman who can play all over. Rick DeBrew is another third-year guy. Emmanuel Hickman. I mean, they're legitimately 2 to 3 deep up front, which, as you mentioned, by the American standard, usually it's tough for those conferences to really stockpile defensive line talent. And ECU, they don't have tremendous length up front, but they do have good size and good depth, which is a good problem to have.
So let's move to the back 4, back 5. This is kind of the one area where I guess for the defense, if you have to have a concern, maybe it's not a concern. But I feel like they did allow quite a few explosive plays last year. Now, part of that I think was just maybe the style of defense that Mike Houston teams play. Are you worried about DB? What are your kind of thoughts there?
So I would consider myself somewhat in the middle. I mean, I think they lost DJ Ford, who was a North Carolina transfer. He came in as a grad transfer, played 1 year. But I really feel like the safeties that will go from kind of part-time players to full-time starters have the chance to really elevate the defense. And Tegan Wilk and Julius Wood, time will tell. Everybody looks good in spring practice, so we'll see come the season. But I just like what I saw just from a consistency standpoint this spring compared to the last few years at safety. Corner, I feel really good about Malik Fleming. He'll be starting on one side. The other side is a major question mark. You're losing Jaquan McMillan, who was an All-American. Pro Football Focus had him graded as the highest-rated cornerback in terms of coverage in the country at the FBS level. So he was a premium lockdown corner, and it's just hard to go out and replace that with another guy coming in. I mean, there's 2 or 3 guys vying for that position. Time will tell. But you would hope that the ability and the depth of the front seven can maybe kind of mask that cornerback spot, at least to allow somebody to get their feet wet. But I do think, Blake Harrell, the defensive coordinator, he plays in a very aggressive style of defense. They blitz a ton, and they have been susceptible to giving up big plays, but they're also one of the best third down defenses in the country. So if they can find a way to limit the explosives and continue that third down efficiency, I really like where this defense is going.
No doubt about it. Stephen Igoe, Hoist the Colors. Listen to him on the Hoist the Colors podcast as well. Everything East Carolina on the 24 Sports Network. Thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks, bud.
All right, that's the bell. Cover 3 College Football Summer School is over for today, but don't worry. We'll be back soon with even more episodes filling you in on the top teams in college football. Please give us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on YouTube and on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast, and we'll see you all soon.